I began woodworking and playing drums when I was young. So the dream of building my own drum set has been a lifetime goal. I've now realized that dream by creating this solid shell cherry drum set from this 24-inch diameter cherry log donated by my friend Bert Olton. My buddies from Huron Valley Woodturners Club in Ann Arbor, Michigan, helped me mount the huge log on Russ Clenard's one-way lathe, and we roughed it into a cylinder. We left the cylinder large enough to account for shrinkage. The end goal was to core several drum shells, with the largest being 18-inch in diameter from this single log. We marked the cut lines and began cutting the cylinders using the McNaughton slicing tool. Plunging the tool into the end grain by hand led to disastrous results when a massive catch ripped the cylinder from the tailstock and the faceplate. I remounted the cylinder and rigged up a machinist slide to hold the slicing tool. This provided improved control of the feed rate and the cutting action. I made cuts halfway through from one side before turning the piece around to cut from the other side. For added safety, prior to making the final plunge cut on the outermost shell, I inserted shims into the headstock side to support the shell as it broke free. Here I am with the first and largest drum shell. Notice the ridge inside the shell where the two coring cuts met at the center. At this point, the shell is about 19 inches in diameter with a 1-inch wall thickness. I continued in this manner until all the shells were cut. Once the process was ironed out, things went pretty smoothly. I took the shells home and recorded their diameter, then left them in the basement to dry. 2 years later, during a visit, my brother asked, "Are you ever going to do anything with those?" Freshly motivated, I set upon the task of machining the shells into their final diameter and wall thickness. I began with the smaller shells. They dried slightly out of round, so I mounted them on the lathe with a loose-fitting jam chuck so as not to distort their shape. I secured the shell using shims, a few corner blocks, and some hot melt glue. I began shaping the interior using an Exocet tool, which has a ring-type cutter and a chip breaker to limit cut depth. I cut the outside diameter an 1/8 inch less than the common drum diameter, so it will fit a pre-made Mylar drum head. With the final wall thickness to 5/16 of an inch, I added a 45-degree bearing edge with a slight back cut, where the drum head will seat to the shell. I turned the smaller drums to their final dimensions and cut the bearing edges while they were mounted on the lathe. Cutting the bearing edge on the lathe assures true and uniform contact between the shell and the drum head. The 16 and 18-inch shells were too large to fit on my lathe, so I cut the exterior surface on the router table by mounting it in this cradle system. The router is mounted beneath the table, and I used a 1/2-inch router bit to cut the shell to a true cylinder. These wooden discs secure the shell to the axle of the cradle and serve as a template indicating the target shell diameter. When the shells were dried, they warped slightly. In this location, very little material will need to be removed, while on this side, quite a bit of material will have to be trimmed off. This is the jig I made to cut the inside diameter. The drum rolls over roller skate wheels, and the router slides back and forth on a pair of angle iron rails. After cutting a full circumference, I move the router further down the rail and repeat the cycle. The process takes quite a long time because I have to take very light cuts to avoid vibration as I cut to the final wall thickness of 5/16 of an inch. The shells were cut to length on the table saw. I started the saw with the blade retracted, then raised it up while rotating the shell over the roller skate wheels. This was definitely the scariest operation so far. With the shells cut to length, I used a router with a 45-degree bit to cut the bearing edge. After countless hours of sanding, the shells were ready to be finished with instrument-grade lacquer. Expertly applied by my friend Brian Linehan, the proprietor of Littlefield & Sons Furniture Service. Now comes the wet sanding, followed by 5 more coats of lacquer. Just look at that beautiful wood grain. And notice that the grain travels vertically rather than horizontally, as on commercially made laminate drums. Using a circular template, I marked out the lug hole positions over top of blue painter's tape. After carefully drilling the holes, I began the assembly process. I chose to apply arch-style lugs from drumfoundry.com for all of the drums. The first completed drum, a 13 by 4 inch snare drum with die-cast rims and Drum Foundry throw-off. And here's the final product, 5 pieces. An 18 by 18 inch bass drum, a 16 by 16 inch floor tom, a 10 inch and 13 inch mounted tom with a 13 inch snare. I used Ludwig isolation mounts to suspend the toms and allow them to resonate freely. But how do they sound? To find out, I asked the experts at Maxwell Drums. Graciously, Steve Maxwell agreed to give them a run-through.
Very nice, very deep. And they're tuned low, you know. This is like big band.
I'm really pleased with how these drums turned out. Because all the drums were fabricated from the same log, they seem to have a resonant affinity for one another. They actually sound better as an ensemble than they do individually. With the shells only being 5/16 of an inch thick, you can feel the shell resonate when you play it. The resonance of the shell really adds to the tone and character of the drum.
Yeah, it's great drums though. Very nice roar. They got a really nice roar to them. It's good. Because when you tune them this low, it's got a nice pure resonance. Tuned very, very low, but. Yeah, good job. Well done. You see that? Like, it's a really nice pure sound because, yeah, it's the kind of wood that you might make a wood block out of. You know? Yeah, man, it's a cool kit. Fun to play.
I've recently obtained a couple more large cherry logs. This one measuring 29 inches wide by 26 inches tall and 21 inches deep. My plan is to add a 20-inch bass drum and a 14-inch floor tom to my handmade cherry drum set.
They're wonderful though.